The Book of Leviticus, Chapter 15, from the Sunday School Bible, 1445 BC. Copyright, the Sunday School Bible, LLC, 2025. All rights reserved. Bodily Discharges. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Speak to the children of Israel Jacob, and say to them, when any male has a running issue, meaning abnormal discharge, out of his flesh, he is unclean." Note, the King James Version uses the term running issue in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 2. However, the Hebrew Bible, Masoretic text, uses the word zav, which usually is interpreted as an abnormal genital discharge, and also includes abnormal bleeding outside a woman's regular menstrual cycle. Therefore, to ensure the reader understands that running issue is not limited to one exact medical diagnosis, but broadly refers to persistent abnormal discharges, the SSB will replace the King James Version term running issue with abnormal discharge. End of note. Abnormal male discharges from infections or diseases. The Lord continued speaking to Moses and Aaron. This will be his uncleanliness in his issue, whether his flesh runs with his issue or his flesh is stopped from his issue. It is his uncleanliness. Every bed on which he lies down is unclean. Everything he sits on is unclean. Anyone who touches his bed will wash their clothes, bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until the evening. Anyone who sits on anything whereon the unclean male sat will wash their clothes, bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches the flesh of the unclean male will wash their clothes, bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until the evening. If the unclean male spits on a clean person, then the clean person will wash their clothes, bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until the evening. The saddle on which the unclean male rides will be unclean. Anyone who touches anything that was under the unclean male, that person will be unclean until evening and will wash their clothes, bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until the evening. Anyone who the unclean male touches without having first rinsed his hands in water, that person will wash their clothes, bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until the evening. The vessel of earth, or clay vessel, that the unclean male touches will be broken. Every vessel of wood that the unclean male touches will be rinsed in water. When the man's unclean issue has stopped, and he is cleansed of his uncleanliness, he must count to himself 7 days to ensure his condition has ended. After the 7 days, he must wash his clothes in water and bathe his flesh in running, flowing, or fresh water, and then he will be clean. Note, the King James Version uses the phrase rinsed in water in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 13. However, the Hebrew Bible, Masoretic text, uses the phrase mayim hayim, which means living water, such as flowing spring water, and not general water for rinsing as in other verses. This is the only verse in Leviticus chapter 15 where the Masoretic text uses the phrase for running or flowing fresh water. End of note. The Lord continued speaking to Moses and Aaron. On the 8th day, the male will take for himself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons and come before the Lord to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and give the 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons to the priest. The priest will offer the 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, one for a sin offering and one for a burnt offering. The priest will make an atonement for the man before the Lord for the man's discharge. Normal emission of male semen. The Lord continued speaking to Moses and Aaron. If any man has an emission of semen, the man will wash all his flesh in water and be unclean until the evening. Wash with water every garment wherein there is semen. Wash with water every piece of leather wherein there is semen, and be unclean until the evening. The woman with whom a man lies down, and with whom he has an emission of semen, they both will bathe themselves in water and be unclean until the evening. Normal female menstrual cycle. The Lord continued speaking to Moses and Aaron. If a woman has a discharge of blood from her normal menstrual cycle, she will be set apart for 7 days, and whosoever touches her will be unclean until the evening. Everything that she lies on or sits on during this time will be unclean. Anyone who touches her bed will wash their clothes, bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until the evening. Anyone who touches anything that she sat on will wash their clothes, bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until evening. If anyone touches anything belonging to the unclean woman that was lying on her bed, or lying on anything she sat on, they will be unclean until the evening. If any man lies down with the unclean woman at all, and her flowers touch him, meaning the blood from her menstrual cycle touches him, the man will be unclean for 7 days, and all of the bed wherein they laid down will be unclean. Abnormal female bodily discharges. The Lord continued speaking to Moses and Aaron. If a woman has a discharge of her blood for many days, but not during the time of her menstruation, or if the bleeding continues beyond the time of her menstruation, all the days of the discharge of her uncleanness will be the same as the days of her separation, and she will be unclean. Every bed whereon she lies each day of her discharge will be to her as the bed of her menstruation. Whatsoever she sits on will be unclean as the uncleanliness of her menstruation. Anyone who touches those things will be unclean, and will wash their clothes, bathe themselves in water, and be unclean until the evening. But if she is cleansed from her discharge, then she will count to herself 7 days, and after 7 days she will be clean. On the 8th day, she will take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young pigeons, and bring them to the priest to the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. The priest will offer one of the turtle doves or one of the pigeons for a sin offering, and offer the other for a burnt offering. The priest will make an atonement for her before the Lord for the discharge of her uncleanliness. Summary of bodily discharges. The Lord continued speaking to Moses and Aaron. Therefore, you will separate the children of Israel Jacob from their uncleanliness, so that they will not die in their uncleanliness when they defile my tabernacle that is among them. This is the law for the person who has a discharge, the person who has an emission of semen, and who is defiled because of it. This law is also for a woman who is sick from her menstruation, and the person who has a discharge of male or female, and the man who lies with her who is unclean.